Welcome to the Inside EcoDevo podcast, where we highlight economic development happening in the state of Missouri. I'm your host, Eric Thurman, with the Missouri Department of Economic Development. And on this episode, we're going to begin covering the National Security Crossroads workshop that took place in early March of this year, 2025. This workshop is the culmination of work to recognize the Crossroads region of Missouri and Kansas as a cornerstone of our national defense ecosystem. Now, you're probably asking, what does this have to do with economic development? Well, the conversations you're going to hear in these next episodes centered around things like providing high-paying jobs, increasing federal investment, targeting innovation, and advancing prosperity for all citizens of Missouri and Kansas. These are all topics that involve economic development efforts. So let's begin with the general session of the workshop, which covered the National Security Crossroads project findings. This discussion features co-administers of the project, Harry Roberts, who's the Missouri Military Advocate, and Barry Wiggins, who's the Executive Director of the Governor's Military Council for the state of Kansas, and it's moderated by the Contract Project Manager, Michael Gund, with the Matrix Design Group. Okay, with that very long intro out of the way, let's listen in on this opening conversation.
All right, gentlemen, so 2017, this is when it started. It was a volunteer-led organization. There were some meetings. KC-ADC is the one that hosted quite a bit. And by sheer will and might, you reinvigorated this NSC. I think you said it took a couple years to get the grant funding, and then we were the lucky recipient of the contract. So as we are now in 2025, 8 years from the idea, the concept, the initiative, there's been a lot of growth. And in this environment, the defense ecosystem is more important now than ever. We can all agree on that. So when we say unite stakeholders, so the way the general session is going to go, unite stakeholders, I'm going to push a question over to you, sir, for the first one, and then military friendliness, General Wiggins, I'll push that over to you. Unite stakeholders. When I see everyone in this room, I feel like that's a success. There are a lot of folks, and I said there's a lot of principals. When I was printing out the name badges, I saw principal, president, CEO, principal, director. This is the cream of the crop for each of these organizations. And I hope that you take back what you learned today, the excitement, and you talk to your organization about, following the NSC more closely. So, Mr. Roberts, what is the power of uniting stakeholders from both Kansas and Missouri and rowing in one direction? What do you think the ceiling is for that?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's really a ceiling. All right, I'm a very optimistic person by nature, but I think if you just look at the region, you think about what we have here. Number one, if you're going to join the Army, there's a darn good chance you're going to get your basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, right? And if you're in the Army and you're dealing with small arms, that small caliber munition is going to be produced at Lake City Army Ammunition Plant. And then you're going to get assigned somewhere, and you might end up over in Kansas at Fort Riley at the Big Red One, right? And so then, if you think about that, if you end up having to go into theater, there's a pretty good chance, if you're in the Army and ground forces, that you're going to have A-10s flying over and protecting you, right? And then if we need bigger armaments, then we have Boeing over there that I think has made over 500,000 JDAMs and over 50,000 directed JDAMs where they can control exactly where they land. Then we have, obviously, our nuclear deterrent mission, and that's at Whiteman, right? And so there's a nuclear element there, and over 80% of those parts that go into our nuclear deterrent mission or systems come from Honeywell. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going, and we have a base, we have a foundation here that is what we can really build off of. We're not at the beginning. I mean, we have a solid base, and when you consider between Missouri and Kansas, our combined investment from the federal government puts us in the top 10 of defense dollars. We have great representation on the Hill. That's where a lot of our strength comes from, because we all, obviously we have Senator Moran, who is on Senate Appropriations. We have Senator Marshall over in Kansas. We have Senator Schmidt, who's on Senate Armed Services. We have Senator Hawley, who has done some work when he was on Senate Armed Services Committee, obviously to support Fort Leonard Wood. There's no limit to where this can go if we are all communicating and joining together. The Missouri and Kansas, we don't compete for missions, right? Those missions kind of connect to each other. If you think of folks that, well, once again, you think of the 442nd flying the A-10, they're going over to Kansas and they're using their ranges over there to practice, and they're setting up training at Sedalia and on deployments, things like that. I mean, we are already partners. What we need to do is develop that to be stronger, because we are competing against Texas, Florida, California when it comes to defense. This is I hate to say it, it's a very competitive business, right? So if we can join our efforts together, Kansas doesn't even play Mizzou anymore, right? I mean, they're in different conferences. But if we can truly combine our efforts, work together, we will be the strongest when it comes to defense when we're looking 25 and 30 years down the road. I believe that.
Well, you heard it. That is the corridor, right? The defense corridor of the Midwest. So the beating heart of the nation. And you're in a pretty good spot, locale-wise, to get in and out. So that is the power of uniting stakeholders from Kansas and Missouri. And we have not, as Matrix, in 25 years, have done a two-state. So for you guys are truly pioneering, you're trailblazers in combining efforts. And I think the sky's the limit. So maybe I should not have used ceiling. But no, I appreciate you calling me out on that. So, all right, General Wiggins, sir. What is Kansas doing to promote military friendliness? What are your opportunities?
First, Mike, you mentioned something that's very important. It's one of the reasons and the things that drew me here to this region, and that was values. Kansas and Missouri share what we consider our military values, which we hold dear. And to those that raise their right hand and swear to defend this nation, they're wired differently. They're not wired to search for money. They're not wired to go after fame. Although when I drove in here today, I passed by small little communities that produce 3 astronauts, a 5-star general, and 2 presidents. That's pretty significant when you think about it. The intellectual acumen for this region is strong. And so one of the other attributes that we hold dear is humility. People have a tendency sometimes to mistake humility for not being a champion. For example, I have friends up in New England, big Patriot fans, right? And they wanted to rub it in that the Kansas City Chiefs lost the Super Bowl. And all I had to say to them is, it's a shame when the closest that New England's got to the Super Bowl is a Dunkin' Donuts commercial, right? So we're champions here in this region. And we understand that our nation's most precious resource is sons and daughters. We're the cloth of this nation. We don't mistake athletes, singers, entertainers, in a lot of cases, as although they're very important, don't get me wrong, but we do understand who the true heroes are. And a lot of them are here in this region. A lot of them have raised their right hands and swore to defend this nation, and that's important. So when you talk about military friendliness, we don't have a problem in the Midwest saying thank you for your service. We've never had that problem. We've never had a problem with people protesting outside our military installations. Just doesn't happen. We have people that, in some cases, families that have 9 children on farms, understanding that the farm can only support 1, and the mother and fathers of those families advocating military service as a noble option. That's significant. We also have academic institutions here in this region that are second to none. And they embrace our military families to include the spouses. For example, when I came in, I'm sure we got first sergeants in the crowd, but I remember my first sergeant telling me if we'd have wanted you to have a spouse, we'd have issued you one. 7 to 11% of the force was married. And you flash forward today, over 60% of the force is married, and over 55% of those spouses have jobs. Matter of fact, most of them are more educated than the service member. That's significant. So we need to not only embrace the military, we need to embrace those families as they come in because they're a significant part. But when I look up here and I see the folks sitting in the red bedroom, as you called it, what's significant to me, and Harry touched on this, in 2017, there was a lot of people sitting there across from tables throwing out this National Security Crossroads, seeing if it would stick, armed with an understanding that we're in a race, we're in a competition, and that if we don't start moving forward, we're moving backwards because California, Texas, Ohio, Colorado, Georgia, Florida, all of them are moving out smartly to build this cooperative effort to get in the canoe and all start rowing in the same direction. And yet, we as a region had a tendency to get in the canoe and somebody would start rowing backwards. And I remember in Boy Scouts, that frustrated me to the point where I wanted to throw the individual out because the canoe kept going in circles. Well, looking at this room, what's really stuck out to me is these are the individuals that can bring the National Security Crossroads to fruition. Harry and I could sit there and row as hard as we wanted, and we were doing a pretty good job. Harry probably better than I. But it's the individuals here that really gives me great heart. And that military friendliness we don't need to worry about, but everybody locking arms in this room and before they leave, develop relationships, an azimuth and a velocity we want to move out on, that's the most important thing.
That's awesome. And I know during our conversations, that you're doing some things in Kansas that we have not seen in a lot of states, such as your spousal reciprocity. And I know there's so many transitioning veterans, whether they're separating or retiring, that are coming out of the region. And it is how to attract and retain them to stay. So I know both states are doing, yeoman's work on getting after it. So I appreciate that. No, it's a big one. So thank you. All right, build defense industry. So this will be pushed to both of you. And I think, Mr. Roberts, I think you already kind of answered this already during your initial conversation. But it's how important, the B-21 is coming to Whiteman. That advocacy, that community, the school going in, there's just so much in that area where, the sky's the limit for other big time mission attraction, mission retention. I know NGA in St. Louis opted to stay in St. Louis. They're building that giant area with less classified space to really network. So when you think build, and I'll push it to Mr. Roberts first, when you think build defense industries, what comes to mind with the Crossroads region? And you did say it, in so many words, it's a zero-sum game. You said it's very competitive. Now you have some bordering states that are competitive. They're just not there yet. You did talk about some that are beyond the borders. But in your opinion, what can the NSC do to change the game with build defense industries?
The number one thing we can do is we can have what we've done here and get the folks that can actually make things happen in the room together and communicating. You can go listen to people talk all day long. There's no action involved in that. We actually need to have action. We have to have people communicating that can help each other attain those goals and build the business. If you're not communicating with someone that can help you, find someone to communicate that can. Whether it's our congressional delegates, whether it's our state governments, because the state government and federal government are going to have to work together too from an economic standpoint. So we've got to communicate. If you're a defense industry and you're not getting the educated talent you need, you've got to talk to higher ed. You've got to talk to that college, whether it's a skills college or a four-year institution. You got to talk to them about getting the folks trained that can succeed working for you. That's what this is all about. If you're in the military, I've heard it said a number of times, I believe it's true. I don't think the TAP program in the military is actually effective. No disrespect there, but if there is some effectiveness, let's just say there's room for improvement. And that's for all of us. Even in my work, there's room for improvement, right? You always have to reassess yourself and then move forward. But having folks communicate that can help you achieve those goals. So if it's higher education, talking to industry, if it's our defense folks talking to industry, vice versa, we've got to be able to communicate to solve those problems and connect the dots. That's what Crossroads was born about anyway. So I think that's probably the best thing we can do is communicate and take action. And then feel free to think outside the box. You know, when I talk to folks that are in the military, that have been in high command levels, we need to start thinking about, and don't get me wrong, I'm not being a cloud in the big cloud in the sky, but we got to think about the worst day in Missouri and Kansas. We got to think about how we're going to be prepared for the worst day in America. There are opportunities to develop that as well. So whether that is AI, whether that is solving problems in broken communication, whatever that is, we need to think about those things too.
Thank you, sir. General Wiggins, do I need to push that question back?
Well, I think we got to look and start breaking paradigms. I think we look at defense industry and defense in a myopic way. And there is a whole exponential area of growth, whether it's simulation, cyber. There's an innovation out there, and a lot of the research, so we heard universities, by the way, it's not insignificant that we have all these academic institutions that have researchers that are producing programs that the defense industry like DARPA is interested in. Now it's how do we take that and we inculcate that into our national security corridor in this region and work with our businesses in order to foster that type of innovation, that type of intellectual acumen as we go forward. What azimuth are we setting? And you talked about the GIS product out there. What was significant to me when it popped up, and I saw these azimuths coming out of Kansas and going into these other states, and yet having a realization that there might be a company right here in Kansas that produces that same product or has a capability to produce it, yet we're going all the way to California, incurring the transportation costs, all those things when we could serve our region. And yeah, am I parochial? Yes. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, I'll wear it as a badge of honor because I know other states are doing the same thing. It's like the workforce. I go to Fort Riley, Kansas, 2,100 soldiers and service members separating, retiring annually. And when I go to a hiring fair and I see that 3/4 of the companies that are sitting in the room are from other states and other regions, it pains me. Because what it means is that other regions are poaching our intellectual acumen and our workforce to work for them, when we ought to be working just as hard to keep them here. That's what's important. So the number one thing I would take a look at is there are people, many of them sitting in this audience right here, that are moving out in innovation and on an azimuth that needs attention and needs cooperative effort from somebody else sitting in this room. And so networking today is critical because you might have the solution to a problem that somebody's been trying to solve. And I'll tell you, I've been there on the ground. I don't want to call out one particular group or individual, but I have fought zombies in Salina out of a van. And everybody goes, wow, Wiggins, what are you talking about? There's this pure imagination group that came in. There's K. Aries going in Salina. That's simulation-based, that is such state-of-the-art that it just almost blew my mind. Now, you got to realize I tried to major in baseball and fraternity in college. So I'm not really all that hard to impress. But there's many more out here that are working on similar things that we need to take a look at. We need to maximize and figure out how we can grow that here in our region.
Yeah, absolutely. We did hear a lot of stovepipes. You know, a lot of people are, everyone's working amazing things in this region, but they're working in a stovepipe. and the obstacles that they're hitting, may be massive obstacles to each person, but they're molehills when you bring the collective, right? The collaboration. And that's what these networking sessions are. They are 20 minutes. And then we have the end of the workshop, about an hour and a half before the doors are shut and you have to go out into the blizzard, so to speak, I guess, that's happening at 4 p.m. and beyond. But no, so that is very powerful. So thank you for that. And that is, we did not rehearse this. They did not collude together. At least I didn't know that they did. But you're hearing the same thing from two different states, and at some point, it's a zero-sum game. So if you have folks from Wichita transitioning out of McConnell and getting jobs in Missouri, that elevates their economic impact, and Kansas loses. However, as the NSC region, it all increases. So that's really good to hear. So I appreciate that. So I think we have one more slide, and this is how can you organize the NSC for success, right? This is the long-term strategy. So to make the National Security Crossroads a sustained organization, what can we do to do that? Now, as Matrix, 25 years experience of standing up these type of organizations, not two states, but organizations, and they're still active and successful today. These are some of the processes or the resources that we would recommend and envision. So we'll go with General Wiggins first. How in your mind can this go from what it was in 17 to what it is now in 25 to what it can be in, say, 3 to 5 years? And how can we get after that?
I think I mentioned it. The individuals that are sitting here collectively, we all have to come to an agreement that this is a worthwhile endeavor and it's something we need to move out on. But a vision without resources is hallucination. It's not going to come to fruition. So we have to find the personnel that focus on this particular aspect. By the way, in the state of Kansas, for example, the Department of Defense, and I'm sure Harry is probably a little more, equates to about $13-14 billion in GDP to the state of Kansas. That's huge. But it's something we don't necessarily put a focus on. And we need to, because we have some communities in our state that about 85% of their GDP depends upon those military installations. And I mentioned spouses. We don't even get to ask them if they work and what they contribute. There's no mechanism to kind of draw that. So it takes a dedicated workforce to do this, and it's going to take sacrifice by all of us in here, either time-wise, but those resources that are necessary to drive this, because that's what it's going to take to drive change. And we need to change. We need to take advantage of this collective group instead of stovepipe, collectively move out on an azimuth and a velocity in order to accomplish things regionally, understanding that other states, other regions are already doing this. And that's why when we sat around the table, we had a realization that there is a huge competition going on. We just have to realize that.
Yeah, Mr. Roberts, I'll focus you on the second red bullet on the return on investment. So how could this organization provide a return on investment for those folks that would like to dedicate resources?
I want to talk about the fact that Matrix was an independent contractor that had no idea really what the study was going to reflect. And I mean, this was a very in-depth study. General Wiggins was with all of the interviews in Kansas. I was with all of the interviews in Missouri, okay? And so even though we're watching it transpose, progress, so forth, we didn't really know what the information was going to tell us, right, as we're collecting it. So organizing for success, you're going to see this as more and more you see the panelists go through this today. I think you're going to come to the realization that the study is accurate, that the study says there has to be a joining of the stakeholders in Missouri and Kansas that come together. I'll make it look like this, like a board that has one mission, and that's to grow the National Security Crossroads in all the necessary areas that it needs, whether it's defense industry, whether it's guiding the education, so forth, but as partners, and having a person who is getting up every day who thinks nothing but growing the defense ecosystem in the states of Missouri and Kansas jointly. That's what's going to take. The return on investment, look around. Look around at how much bigger, first of all, how impressive this group is, the folks that are here today, what they and who they represent, and then double it. That's going to be the return on investment. We're going to have a growing economy in the two states that's sustainable. That's the return on investment, Michael.
It sounds like a pretty good return on investment. So it, it's economic prosperity, to grow that. And when you get more people together, more minds together, more ideas, not so much killing zombies in Salina, but the growth is exponential. And it really, as you said, it's already being done in some other states. The time is now. So this is an organization for action. It's not a, sit back and add a little bit of advocacy. This is an actionable organization to show and to arm, whether it's legislators or policymakers, to get after that. And when you all get together and you're rowing in the same direction, it's powerful, right? So that's awesome. And I think that's the last slide. So now it's open for questions in the audience. So those were the softballs I had. I cannot tell you what the audience is going to say. And if, we'll give maybe a minute or two. So you'll see 2 microphones on the bottom shelf here. So if you would like to ask a question to Mr. Roberts or General Wiggins, please come on down.
Hi, I'm Roger Kashanejad. I'm from Thermovon Technologies, and we are in Columbia, Missouri. I will try to pose this as a question. How do you guys feel about the next workshop being focused on that question about how do we expand and engage defense companies and build the defense companies with more of a show, small businesses coming here with the primes, with the academic research facilities as well, so we can network that group, the guys doing the work, right? Back in the day, I used to do real work. Now I do BD. But doing something like that the next time, I think this is a great venue for the first time, and the great folks that are here are the right folks. But that, bringing everyone together to grow business here in the Missouri-Kansas region.
I'll go ahead and jump in. First of all, General Wiggins and I will stay involved. But once again, this crossroads is all about you. So the leadership that develops from the crossroads, if this is the direction it goes, is really going to come out of the group. We'd support that, right? I can say that from the Office of the Missouri Military Advocate. We would support and will continue to support as this moves forward. But the ownership of this is going to be all of you. This is why you are here today, to see the results of the study. As this goes forward, this is not going to be Perry's and my decision. This is the stakeholders to decide, but we would support it any way we possibly can.
This is a first. And first thing I know about first is they're never perfect, right? But you take the strategy and then you apply that, and where you talk about the people that roll up their sleeves, that's the action. So we have to be able to take what this strategy, what this plan, what's highlighted in this matrix discovery, and then figure out how we want to apply that to our region as we move forward. And a lot of that's going to be the Herculean efforts of folks just like you're talking about. Because we can sit here and talk about the ethereal nature of this national security crossroads, but until we put it in application, until it impacts economically, until it brings businesses and work back to these communities and to this region across both states, then that's that return on investment that we talked about. We need to see that, right? Because people expend those resources. There's an expectation that we're going to get something in return. That's business. Okay, so I think that in the future, if we established a board, we established a group, and they were focused, there's going to be those sessions where we bring in the individuals that really is the rubber on the road, because you're going to have to. And then there's going to be constant networking sessions, because we got to drive people to communicate with each other and to use the tool in order to find out. Because if Mike is buying something outside the state and it's being produced just down the road and across the border into Missouri, I'm going to have somebody that talks to Mike and says, you need to move out of the state. No, I wouldn't do that, all right? But the bottom line is, it's that communication. It drives that, because that's where we want to be. We want to be in the communications, just like Harry was talking about, and communicating has got to go up, it's got to go down, and it's got to be across. So that's everybody.
Hi, my name is Aaron North. I'm a consultant with our Civic Council of Greater Kansas City. That's an organization that has about 70 CEOs and other business executives from some of the biggest employers in the region. We work closely with the Chamber, other business and civic groups, Kansas City Area Development Corp. So my question is, what are some ways we should think about those types of business and civic institutions that represent big employers, or, you know, in the case of the Chamber, a couple thousand different businesses, when it comes to the crossroads, right? So how can those organizations think about the ways they intersect with the type of effort that we're talking about today, and some things that we could do, you know, early on to make sure that those groups are engaged?
I'd say staying in communication with folks like KCADC. I try to relate things to other things I've seen. Over the years, I was so impressed with how KCADC worked to grow the National Healthcare Corridor. But they're not the only ones that were involved doing it. The chambers, all the chambers up and down the line were involved in it. The businesses obviously are involved in it. You know, I think of Bear and a lot of different ones. I think communication, once again, is saying, hey, listen, we're interested in this. We're a business that can help support. You may be, quite honestly, I think of a business over in St. Louis, a law firm, and there's a gentleman there who by trade is a lawyer, but he also spends time working for a company called Vet Jobs, which is a great institution that helps veterans find jobs. He's working on a mission to try to help veterans find jobs in St. Louis and Missouri. There's lots of different things that companies can do that they may not be directly linked to defense, but they maybe have members who participate being linked to defense. So through volunteerism and things like that, I would say the best thing is to stay in communication with the local chambers, like I said, in KCADC, both sides of the river. Let's remember, we're partners. We're in this together. And so some of those companies may end up being a board member, if that's the way the association's set up, to participate, because that kind of leadership would be very helpful, period, in the organization. Does that answer it? I mean, if it doesn't, dig deep, make it a tougher question.
Well, I'm also thinking about ways that we build investment, right? Like capital, and we bring dollars into this space. And a lot of the times that happens is through the folks who know how to do that, right? Which are often leading big initiatives in big companies. So maybe even thinking about different ways that that we can build investment in the defense sector overall, and in some of the emerging projects or some of the emerging technologies that are coming out of universities and other things like that, in ways that I just don't think we have, honestly.
Well, and another resource, and we have several folks here from Missouri Department of Economic Development, right? I don't know if you got folks from Commerce.
Yes, absolutely.
But they know about different opportunities, incentives. We have a workforce training program at Missouri Department of Economic Development that may help. So I'd say definitely reach out to Missouri DED. It's about asking the questions and saying, what about this? And developing those funds to help National Security Crossroads to continue on. Yes.
I think it's important to communicate to them about the ecosystem and making sure they're informed. But more importantly, these corporations, these research institutions that are developing things, you may not think of yourself as a defense industry, but when you're invested in something that provides and increases defense and readiness, you're a part of the defense industry. So what I would communicate is, we have to communicate and have transparency on things that people are working on within both of the states, And then we communicate that with our business leaders because they might have the manufacturing solution. They just haven't thought of it. And maybe they marry that together. For example, we got a brief about hydrogen storage. And believe it or not, the Midwest is a great place to store hydrogen. And hydrogen is a thing of the future. It scares me because when I think of hydrogen, I think of bombs, right? That's not what we're talking about here. But there are people who are researching that and looking for technology and things that they can apply in order to store hydrogen as a power source. That might be underground. How do you transport it? There may be a corporate member that has that solution, but not tied to defense. So when you hear the word defense industry, I'm kind of apprehensive, Mike. I mean, when we talk about the ecosystem and then we talk about national security corridor in regards to defense. But I think there are corporate members out there, businesses that are out there that may not consider themselves defense industry, but may have solutions that assist defense industry or defense in general. And that's why this communication's key. That's why not shutting the door on somebody just because they don't think they're a defense industry partner, and bring everybody in. That's that paradigm break, and I'm talking about people looking at something with a different perspective might bring a solution that we haven't thought about. And as somebody that served in the cloth of the nation and flown into combat, I want the best and brightest, the highest intellectual acumen that this region has to offer. And some of those are CEOs and businesses that you represent to be involved in this process. And I would absolutely welcome them as a part of this National Security Crossroads.
That was the general session of the recent National Security Crossroads event, and it begins our coverage of the great discussions that took place. Stay tuned for the next episode, which will cover academia and how it plays a critical role in the development of the defense ecosystem. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Inside EcoDevo podcast so you can stay up to date on episodes just like this one. Thank you for listening.